11 Days of Remembrance, Day 9. I'm wearing this red and black shirt for now because I love the poppy colors. And I don't care what my hair looks like. I'm being a bit lazy today. Well, I can do that because thanks to what these people, what the veterans did in World War One, World War Two, so I can be lazy if I want to. Okay, Chapter 11. Two gunfighters join forces. June 7th, 1944. D-Day is fully on, and it is one hell of a night to remember. The Gary crew lifted off at 11:30 p.m. in a Lancaster LL973M Mother and was among 112 Lancasters and 10 Mosquitoes. Tonight's trip was vital because the crew was bombing a large tank implant in the Kushri Forest. The area contained fuel dumps, mobile guns, and a heavy contingent of tanks. They needed to prevent those tanks from reaching the coast and attacking the invasion force landing there went in at 7,000 feet and carpet-bombed the area. Intelligence had told them there were many aerodromes in the area. The bombardier John Cook was not able to fly with them, and they picked up FLT Wyndham. He was a really good guy and had a long red handlebar mustache. Larry shook his hand and welcomed him aboard. With the leather flight helmet, all that was missing was a long white scarf wrapped once around his neck. To make him the stereotypical English aviator, they arrived over their target. Wing Commander John Gray called for full reveals. The bombardier now had control. Steady, steady, a bit left, steady, and then finally, bombs away! The flash from the bombardier's camera went off and they banked away. The big Lancaster was now much lighter and responded like a fighter. The mid-upper gun turret was new to Larry, and he really enjoyed the visibility that was not possible in the tail. There was a whole new world to him. The mobility coupled up with the ability to continually rotate the turret and the wider perspective of the airspace around him gave him a real rush. He could consistently scan the skies. When they left the target, they flew above a broken white cloud and had good night visibility. They headed for the channel when Larry saw two night fighters flying in opposite direction away from the channel. Heads up, Mac. Two fighters starboard side, 1 mile out. Headed west. Larry responded to McIntosh, the tail gunner. A short time later, Larry sighted a night fighter keeping pace with them on the starboard side. It was flickering his landing lights on and off, which he thought was rather curious. There were probably the mutts who just passed and had done a U-turn to intercept them. Something is not right with this. Set up, Mac, Larry said. Keep your eyes peeled, Mac. We have a fighter climbing up. Do you see him? On the port side, low, he said seconds later. There was no answer. Mac, do you see him? It was a Ju-88, and he was setting up for a deflection shot. The pilot had lost the element of surprise. The guy was coming in at speeds and was only 400 to 500 yards behind them. It was like he was going to ram them. Mac finally spotted him corkscrew, Mac called. Gary didn't put the aircraft into full dive, but into a nice shallow corkscrew instead, which performed both gunners to bring their guns to bear. Mac and Larry blazed away. Both gunners could see the rounds bouncing all over the wing, engine, compartment, and the fuselage. The Ju-88 caught fire and ended in flames, plunged down towards the North Sea. Even if the Ju-88 pilot had fired his cannon, the shells would have gone over the aircraft thanks to Gary's precision flying. If the gunners were not at the top of their game, the German aces could time the remover and catch the Lancaster at the top of its arc and fire a burst into the big bomber. Obviously, some Lancaster's pilots were better than others, and they understood what their gunners needed to defend their platform. The air, er, adrenaline was pumping from the first encounter when Larry saw another black object climbing towards him. Larry was on the intercom again. Mac, the second fighter is coming up the starboard side. Do you see him? Larry was looking directly over the top of McIntosh's turret, and it hadn't moved. Larry called for a corkscrew. They put the night fighter in his sight. Later, McIntosh was firing on him. This was the second Ju-88. After seeing his mate go down in flames, he came and blazed on the starboard side of Lancaster to settle the score. Mac and Larry were pumped and ready. They had his range and they had his number. As Gary issued another corkscrew, he turned to the right fighter and divided into him. The Lancaster pilot was flying the aircraft like a fighter. Larry put the first rounds into him because of the angle at attack. The barrels of Larry's Brownings were glowing red. Suddenly, the Ju-88 dove below the Lancaster. No one had any idea that he was hit because the Ju-88 exploded directly below them. The force of the explosion drove the aircraft a couple hundred feet in the air. How much ammunition do you chaps have? Gary asked. Enough, Larry replied. Gary leveled off the Lancaster and settling it at 6,000 feet for the flight back to England. 20 minutes later, with dawn approaching, the Gary crew was near Brechy Head. Larry spotted another black dot in the sky climbing up to engage them. The fighter was about 1,000 feet below them. It was banked off and then accelerating. It was an Me-410, one of the latest additions to German Air Force. It looked totally different than any Larry had ever seen. It was a twin-engine fighter, but it had a totally different silhouette. The Me-410 had a maximum speed of 600 miles per hour and could climb to 12,000 feet in 8.6 minutes. It carried a powerful offense machine armament accompanying two standard 20mm NG-151 cannons and the semi-automatic VK-10 cannon that could deliver a 1-second salvo weighing 4.6 kilograms. Larry was on the intercom again. Mac, we have another fighter dead astern and below us. Do you see him? With no reply, Larry called for a dive. Gary responded his maneuver, expanded the fighter to the guns. The fighter jerked to the right and fired, and Larry and Mac couldn't wait any longer. Larry had no idea if this guy was a nervous Nelly or not, but this night fighter pilot had picked the wrong crew to attack. They were not to be terrified with tonight. They must have hit something critical because the Me-410 immediately took a shallow dive towards the English coast. When they landed. FLT LT Woodham climbed down from the rear door no, on necessary feet. He held bar mustache was dropping on both sides. It was no longer a thing of splendor and beauty. Larry asked Woodham if he was all right. For the love of God, are they all like this? Woodham asked. Larry was buzzing from the adrenaline. He had survived the worst, most air battle of the war. No, no, tonight was a little quiet, Larry replied. It was easy to be as smart as when you were standing on solid ground, safe and sound. Between McIntosh and Larry, they had fired almost 16,000 rounds during their encounters. They went to see their airmasters the next morning to thank them for their excellent work. The airmasters looked a little surprised by the spontaneous visit. It happened very often, but they took in stride later that day when the airmasters boarded Lancaster M to resupply the aircraft. They were shocked to see the ammunition trays were almost empty. This was the first time in the history of air war over Europe that a single bomber crew had shot down 3 German night fighters in one mission. The PR people jumped on the story in full force because Bomber Command really needed some good press to offer the crew of the loss of men and accepted the hint during the Berlin raids. Air Marshal Harris, the head of Bomber Command, phoned the station commander and asked, "Who the hell are those guys?" The next day, Wing Commander Gary came by and collected McIntosh and Larry and took them to the station commander office. The station commander told them they would both receive the Distinguished Flying Cross for their actions. The previous night, the District Flying Cross (DFC) was awarded to officers and warrant officers for active valor, courage, or determination of duty while flying in active operations against the enemy. Immediately after, the the crews were asked to pose for a photo. Larry was surprised when Gary came up behind him, shook his shoulders, and said, "Larry, you stand beside me." About 10 days later, there was a postgram, "My warmest consideration on the award of your District Flying Cross, awarded by Sir Arthur Harris." On the same day, one of Larry's bunkmates ran in with a copy of the London Gazette and said, "You guys have hit the big time." The article photos read, "One night in June 1944, these officers were rear and minded upper gunners suspended of an aircraft dedicated to attack Casey just under crossing the enemy coast. Flying Officer McIntosh said sighted the Junkers 88 coming in attack. He reverently warned his pilot, who took the necessary combat maneuver. Both gunners opened fire, hitting the enemy aircraft with well-placed bursts, causing it to spin towards the ground. With both engines on fire, almost immediately another Junker 88 sighted. As the enemy aircraft came into close range, Flying Officer McIntosh and his co-gunner met the attacker with just a burst of fire, which caused it to explode in the air. Half an hour later, these gunners engaged yet a third aircraft. Following their attack burst of fire, the enemy fighter fell away and was seen to catch fire before he hit the sea. Flying Officer McIntosh and Pilot Officer Sutherland defended their aircraft with the great skill and resolve and played a large part in the safe return. that their achievement was worth a high price. The same article on the following issue of Five Group News, it introduced a note that the description of the third fighter was not again. The Me-410 was equipped with the latest German radar and avionics. It was recovered basically intact from the English coast. The two German pilots did not survive, and the shore crew recovered their bodies. Larry confirmed McIntosh about it. It apparently no one needs to pat you on the back because you do a hell of a job yourself. With the hell and you tell intelligence you only sighted all these fighters after I told you were there. Oh God, Larry, they just got it all screwed up. Larry chucked it up. The British just took after their own many years later. Larry would think of John Gary asking him to stand beside him for the official photo, and he would come to believe that Gary had seen the report McIntosh had given to intelligence, and it was published fair and wide. A reaction or correction of the actual engagement was not an option. A couple of days later, Gary told Larry that they was scheduled to go on a train to London to meet the king, to be just regretted. Larry refused to go. When Gary asked why, Larry replied, "This is the seventh air crew I have flown with, and you seem to attract night fighters like a magnet. I will not have you flying without me until my tour of duty is over." June 14th, 1944. By this time, the crew was due for leave. Larry headed for London alone and booked a hotel near Hyde Park. He managed to sell a few cartons of cigarettes while there, so he was flush. He entered a pub near the hotel and walked up to the bar order a beer standing at the uh, and other table. He noted two Canadian flying officers. They were talking among themselves, and Larry couldn't see their faces, but he did see their shoulder flashes. He walked over to strike up a conversation. Both men turned around, and he was totally flabbergasted. They were Bruce and Douglas Warren, identical twins from Western Canada. Both were Spitfire pilots and served with the squadron. They both had the nickname Duke, and to accentuate the problem, they both called one another Duke. They became known as Duke Mark I and Duke Mark II. In March 1945, the identical twins were awarded the Discipline Flying Cross by King George VI, who remarked, "I don't believe I have ever done this before." They strode over the window of the pub, and the grin looked out the street. Directly across from them was a dreadful little tea house. Settled by the former window were two very attractive ladies. Larry talked at the two twins and came up with a plan. Duke Mark I walked in front of the window until one of them young ladies made eye contact with him. He then nodded, touched his right index finger to his pick-up cap, and walked on. The two later Duke Mark II did the same thing. Duke Mark I was ducking, walking back beneath the dormer to repeat the maneuver. They had really attracted the attention of the young ladies. The process went on until one of the young ladies ran out of the tea house to determine the light of this line containing all identical men. Unfortunately, Larry suddenly found himself alone in the pub. The twins had left their prey. When Larry returned from leave, he was advised that 5 crews were missing. The real blow was that one of the missing crew was FLT Gallagher's crew. Larry, close, close friend Mary Sullivan, the survival genius, and the chap on board the Lancaster that lost two engines landing was a tail gunner with Gallagher. They shook off his loss, made Larry physically ill. They acknowledged that he had lost a good number of his training buddies and friends, made him wonder if them would survive this bloody war. June 17, 1944, Mac and Larry became VIPs for a day when they were asked to go to fly across across the sun. Assembled 250 aircrew members, famous air gunners. Larry went up the time. The bomber command hoped to install the idea that the Lancaster could be defended with great valor and could also be used with some success of offense against German night fighters. They walked into the hangar and Larry was innately impressed. They were the same age as the rest of the men apart from a few extra lines around their eyes. Larry was contracted to sit in a folding chair at the head table and allow Mac to climb up onto the table to address the group. Mac was an instructor and he was used to making presentations. Larry gave Mac full credit for his ability to put into words that he could not. He didn't say anything that was over or untrue. Larry analyzed it beyond the ability to describe the same way. Mac described the sudden violence of the attack, the scene, the work the crew did when the battle was done, and he last followed them. Some young men could not grasp the importance of being totally prepared. Proper training was imperative, and in order to survive, they had to check and double check to make sure each crew member had adequate clothing because if the electrical system failed, they could freeze to death. They had to make sure the refrigeration was clean and the guns harmonized. The gunners would switch on the oxygen at the level present was in the pump. Both gunners stressed the fact over. Some felt, Larry, fear of God into his fighter oxygen to let the fighter know he was actually clean. Saying, Mac continued by saying that England is in a war zone, and some bombers were shot down as they landed. He stressed that the only safety on their guns was their fighter fingers, and said that when the bomber rolled up on a top, they were time to make the guns safe. Mac had those guys sitting on the edge of their seats. The major points over their time. The target for the Carnahan Railroad, and the crew had gotten used to short trips. Now the one would turn to be an 8-hour flight. Their approach was eventful. When bomb John Kirk dropped his payload, there were incredibly seconds explosion. When John was able to get on the top, the crew a little to no moonlight, which made it difficult to see night fighters, but also at the time the false darkness. He could that work on after leaving the mines in Quebec and Ontario had put him in this place at 10,000 feet, somewhere over France. Larry's unusual ability to see at night was of no advantage to him that night, yet from somewhere within the spider that had felt a tremor through his web. He felt something enter his space. Larry rotated his gun to left and then right. On the next rotation passing center, someone caught his eye, and a swollen black dot, port side, lower astern of the Lancaster. The object took shape as it climbed. He reckoned as a Messerschmitt PF-109 streaking for an attack. The PF-109 angled the port side. There were two other Lancasters quite close to them, and it seemed like the German was trying to short out with one attack. Larry, only seconds to report. Mac fighter attacked the port side. The PF-109 came in slightly above the tail, and Larry got the first round into him, because Mac could not, being the guns bare. A split second later, Mac was letting go from his four guns into the PF-109. It rolled over on its back and went straight down. For a moment, Larry wondered about the pilot in the PF-109. Why did he have to die and not Larry? He shook it off. There were slower, less accurate. Larry and then of his crew were attacked, was sticking around him, and intelligence later, Larry, amazed to see exact of the damage, and could at Cromwell, John Cook clear ammunition photographs taken by the onboard camera, which showed dark smoke blowing from the wreckage and the impact of M. Mike's bombs. 19 or 20 steam engines stood in the ruins of the locomotive. Said the repair shops were destroyed and the lines cut to Dijon, Connaught, and Belfort. A few days later, an actor Larry knew from another crew asked if he would fly a mission with them. Apparently their mid-upper gunner had developed a terminal cold and had such was unable to fly with them very often. Larry went to Gary and explained the situation and asked for permission to fly a mission with the other crew. You will not, Gary replied. Gary had lost the poor chap Larry had replaced in the mid-upper turret in a similar situation as so, because Gary was the ring commander that was that. July 28, 1944, Larry, along with everyone in the briefing room, knew their tardigrade was stationed. Larry took at the long line that entered the flight path across the North Sea and shuddered when the line executed Sutherland was down near, and there were numerous German airfields in the area. Most crew, luckily enough to return from the target, refused to that area as fighter alley. During the briefing, they were told their actual target would be the center of the city of Stalingrad, but the lead bombers would drop their bomb loads on the outskirts of the city. That was because of creep-back bombardiers tended to acquire their target upon entering the outer ring of fire caused by the bombers, and the front drop the load. Some of those bombs will drop short of the target, meaning the next bomber would drop short. Lancaster M, carrying the Geary crew, lifted off an hour after dusk. They joined a flight crossing of 494 other Lancasters, and one of those nights the crews loved to hate the moon when incredibly bright. They were flying at 20,000 feet. The flags were firing skyward like volcanoes erupting at the heavens. It was lit up like daylight over the target. The bombers were hiding against the black sky, and the fighters were on them. It almost seemed like the German night fighters had lined up to get their chance to attack. But Gary was a master pilot, and he was throwing the Lancaster around the sky as if it were a fighter. Out of the black came a FW-190. Executing a straight-line approach, the tail of the Lancaster, Larry spotted him, was about 300 yards and opened up, with Mac bringing over the sea. Bringing over the fire, the fighter bits. Pieces of the FW-190 broke off and reeled in the sky, then spiraled towards the earth. There was a brilliant flash of clouds under the Lancaster, began to corkscrew among them. "Is everyone all right?" Gary asked throughout the intercom. Gary lost 4,500 feet, corkscrewed, and had him climb to back up, cruising. Being exposed near its pilot was Gary to pour on the coal was the big Merlins come under full power. They left a sizzling tail of sparks from the exhaust manifolds that could give away their position of the plane. Also, going straight up under full power was the fuel reserve. The climb had to assume by the master hand's flight engineer to prevent this. 20 minutes later, they were cruising at 15,000 feet. Larry spotted a black dot the starboard side that materialized into a FW-190. Screaming down up upon them, he snapped his turret around and fired the Browning machine guns. But he could see his rounds rip up well astern of the night fighter. This guy was really moving and made an attempt to attack him. Could be the rear or upper turret, but it could be an aggressive maneuver by the pilot that would tip off the German to the of the crew. The German pilot flying in the area had a healthy respect for Lancaster crews, and if the aircraft appeared to be flown by someone who knew his stuff, they could fly on by. Almost 1,000 yards astern, Night Fighter was flipping his landing lights on and off. Larry and Mac were visually distracted. There's a tractor round came flying from was a Ju-88, its cannon blazing. The German must have thought he had the element of surprise. He was wrong. He flew into the cone of his death that both gunners loved, outside their rear turret, directly into the split second. Larry and Mac were on him. The tail and mid upper gunner were 6 Browning blazed up a bridle wall leaded pieces of the Ju-88 like chaff up from weight, smoke and flame upon the night fighter directly under the tail. The flight path to the fighter never changed. It looked like a comet that had entered the Earth atmosphere and fell straight down. Larry looked up seconds later. Another Ju-8 appeared on their tail. He switched his guns to acquire the target. The Ju-88 made a half-headed attempt to set up their banked away. Seeing his flying mate go down in flames must have brought the guts of him. Seconds later, the bombardier Bob Kirk opened up with his 2 Brownings in the nose, with the night fighter with a death breath attempted head-on attack. It was a very bad moment, but Bob was up for an engagement. Bombardiers hardly ever got a chance to fire their guns, and by God, he laid down a nice stream of fire onto the German. To leave the night, they had been attacked 4 times on their last credit, but fell down that Larry, Mac, and received Discernent Flying Cross for their courage and performance, and the way they defended their aircraft and crew. The flight became on that trip was 7 hours 15 minutes and would be the last of their long missions. On this mission, 54 bombers were lost. The Gary crew went on leave and Larry decided to go to Scotland. He arrived in Edinburgh and checked out the office club. When he was at the check-in counter, he met an American Air Force captain. The captain told Larry there was a big bash in the night and suggested that they go together. "Hellboy, do you have anything to drink?" the captain asked. "No," Larry replied. "Well, the hell. Ya all can't go around flying on one wing." Having made that profound conclusion, he pronounced Larry a chap and directed him to a large building downtown that was stories disparate area. When Larry arrived, he encountered the stereotypical sergeant, complete with a unit cigar clamped down his teeth. Larry presumed his note, and the guy behind the counter asked, "How many cases would you like?" Larry answered, "One bottle of Canadian Club." "Who will do?" Canadian Club sold in London for £5 or £6, and a pound was worth $4.75. Grasping his freeze place, Larry muttered, "Damn, these guys know how to fight a war." Larry arrived at the bash and the place was standing room only held up to the bar. Got his first pint of beer he was thought was closer to half a gallon. Standing beside him, young lady already the cups turned towards Larry. "How are you doing tonight, Yank?" "Very well, well, thank you, but I am Canadian," he replied. She was a little blurry-eyed. "Right, an American without money." With that, she tottered off. He turned his back to the bar and served the large ballroom. The place was packed with American servicemen, and they were almost two toe-to-toe ratio of less for men. He was well aware that draw was extra money, and the Americans had arrived with a shortage of almost everything, and they had fog of war being down with a national pastime. The only other place Larry saw more prison bells per square was in Blackpool. Larry eventually found himself a table close to the bar with four young American paratroopers. They were enjoying lively conversation when a young paratrooper fresh from the fields of Nebraska approached Larry. He was down and whispered, "Hey, Canada, could you spare a rubber?" "I sure can," Larry replied. "Anything for a guy that jumps out of a perfectly good aircraft." Larry also believed the Boy Scout motto, "Be prepared." In one pocket he had a good supply of hobby pins, in the other he carried a good supply of condoms. Larry reached into his pocket to retrieve a condom, and he ejected one. A condom directly be handed. The one he had was become snugged. The condom to the young paratrooper horror flew through the air. It hit and rolled across the floor. It wobbled and then landed directly in front of the dismal. The paratrooper was pushing. The young man stood there as he face-fed for a moment. There was a complete silence, which was quickly broken when the charred table erupted in laughter. "Leave it to the Canadians to provide the entertainment," said one of the men, gasping for breath. That's the end of chapter 11. If you see a veteran, they look sad, just talk to them and Maybe they're looking for someone to talk to. And maybe they're looking for a friend. And I thank the veterans for what they have done, so I can make these videos, so I can do things freely. I thank the veterans for what they did, their sacrifices, so I could be free, I could walk, be in peace. Thank you.